March 6, 1944. 28,000 feet above the Brandenburg countryside. Hauptmann Klaus Mietschel adjusted his oxygen mask as he studied the formation, climbing steadily toward Berlin through the crystal clear morning air. Below him, 200 American B-17 flying fortresses maintained their tight defensive boxes, their contrails etching white scars across the German sky. The veteran pilot of Jagdgeschwader 26 had intercepted dozens of Allied bombing formations over the past year, but something felt different about this mission, something that would fundamentally alter his understanding of aerial warfare. What Mietschel couldn't have known as he positioned his Focke-Wulf 190 for attack was that he was witnessing a transformation that would rewrite the rules of daylight bombing. Hidden among the bomber formations, sleek silver fighters were climbing toward Berlin, carrying with them the death warrant of the Luftwaffe's fighter force. The North American P-51 Mustang had arrived in European skies, and with it came a capability that German pilots had never faced before. Long-range escort fighters that could follow the bombers all the way to their targets and back home again. The psychological impact on German fighter pilots would prove more devastating than any military defeat. These men, veterans of campaigns across Europe and Russia, masters of aerial combat who had dominated Allied fighters for years, were about to discover that the rules of engagement had changed forever. The Americans had solved the unsolvable problem of long-range fighter escort, and German pilots were about to experience the terror of facing an enemy that could appear anywhere, at any altitude, at any time. For 3 years, German fighter tactics had relied on a simple reality. Allied escort fighters possessed limited range, forcing them to turn back long before reaching German industrial targets. This created hunting zones where German pilots could attack bombers with impunity, safe in the knowledge that no enemy fighters could reach them. The mathematics of fuel consumption and aircraft range had been their greatest ally, more reliable than any weapon system. Oberleutnant Werner Schröer, an ace with 114 victories who had fought from the deserts of North Africa to the skies over Germany, understood this tactical reality better than most. His standard procedure involved tracking incoming bomber formations, allowing the escorts to reach their maximum range and turn for home, then attacking the defenseless bombers with concentrated firepower. It was methodical, predictable, and devastatingly effective. But on this March morning, as Schröer prepared to execute this proven strategy against the formations approaching Berlin, he noticed something that defied everything he understood about Allied capabilities. The escort fighters weren't turning back. At 26,000 feet over Brandenburg, well beyond the maximum range of any Allied fighter he had ever encountered, sleek silver aircraft continued climbing alongside the bombers. The first German pilots to identify these mysterious escorts transmitted confused reports to ground control. They described single-engine fighters with distinctive scoop-shaped air intakes beneath their fuselages, aircraft that appeared longer and more streamlined than the stubby P-47 Thunderbolts they had grown accustomed to fighting. But the technical specifications mattered less than the terrifying implication of their presence. American fighters were operating 400 miles inside German territory, in airspace that should have been absolutely secure. Major Günther Rall, one of Germany's most successful fighter pilots, with over 250 victories, was leading Jagdgeschwader 11 that morning, when his formation encountered the first P-51s over Berlin. His initial reaction, recorded in his post-war memoirs, captured the psychological shock experienced by German pilots nationwide. The Americans had achieved the impossible, extending fighter coverage deep into the Reich itself. What made this development particularly devastating for German morale was the timing. By March 1944, the Luftwaffe was already struggling with pilot shortages, fuel limitations, and increasingly obsolete aircraft. German fighter pilots had been relying on their ability to choose when and where to engage Allied formations. using hit-and-run tactics that maximize their advantages while minimizing exposure to enemy firepower. The arrival of long-range escorts eliminated this tactical flexibility entirely. The P-51 Mustang represented more than just another enemy aircraft. It embodied American industrial capability at its peak, combining British aerodynamic design with American manufacturing prowess and the most advanced engine technology available. The Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine provided exceptional performance at high altitude, while external fuel tanks extended its operational range to over 1,600 miles. Most importantly, for the psychological war being fought in German cockpits, it could outperform German fighters in almost every category of aerial combat. Hauptmann Johannes Naumann, commanding officer of the 3rd Gruppe of Jagdgeschwader 54, filed a combat report after his first encounter with P-51s that revealed the depth of German concern. His unit had attempted a standard attack on B-17 formations southeast of Berlin, expecting to face the usual escort withdrawal around maximum penetration range. Instead, they found themselves engaged in running battles with American fighters that demonstrated superior speed, climb rate, and maneuverability. The technical superiority of the Mustang became apparent immediately to experienced German pilots. Unlike the P-47 Thunderbolt, which relied on high-altitude performance and heavy firepower to compensate for poor maneuverability at medium altitudes, the P-51 could fight effectively at any altitude. Its laminar flow wing design provided exceptional efficiency, while its lightweight construction delivered agility that matched or exceeded German fighters. But the real psychological blow came from understanding what the P-51's arrival meant for the broader war effort. German intelligence had been tracking American aircraft production with growing alarm throughout 1943, but the appearance of a long-range escort fighter demonstrated technological advancement that exceeded their worst projections. The Americans had not only solved complex engineering problems, but had done so while maintaining mass production capabilities that dwarfed German manufacturing. Oberst Adolf Galland, General of Fighters for the Luftwaffe, recognized immediately that the P-51's deployment represented a strategic turning point. In his post-war writings, he described March 1944 as the moment when he knew the air war was lost. The mathematical reality was inescapable. American bomber formations could now strike any target in Germany with fighter protection throughout their missions. For individual German pilots, this realization produced a range of psychological responses that varied from grim determination to barely concealed panic. Veterans like Hauptmann Mitchell, who had survived years of combat by carefully managing risk and choosing favorable engagement conditions, suddenly found themselves forced into desperate defensive battles against superior aircraft. The first major engagement between German fighters and P-51 escorts over Berlin occurred on March 8, 1944, just 2 days after Mitchell's initial sighting. Jagdgeschwader 1, led by Major Heinz Bahr, attempted to intercept a formation of B-17s targeting aircraft manufacturing facilities in the German capital. The encounter would become a case study in the changing dynamics of aerial warfare. Bahr's formation of 24 Focke-Wulf 190 approached the bomber stream from the south, climbing to attack altitude while monitoring radio frequencies for escort withdrawal calls that never came. At 27,000 feet, his pilots reported enemy fighters maintaining position with the bombers well inside German airspace. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Lieutenant Friedrich Ungar, flying his first combat mission as Bahr's wingman, later described the moment when he realized these were not ordinary escort fighters. The silver aircraft maintained perfect formation discipline while climbing to intercept his unit, demonstrating the kind of systematic tactical coordination that German pilots associated with veteran formations. But these were American pilots, supposedly inexperienced in European combat conditions. The engagement itself lasted less than 10 minutes, but its implications resonated throughout the German fighter force for the remainder of the war. Bahr's unit managed to shoot down 2 B-17s, but lost 6 aircraft in return, including 2 pilots with over 100 combat missions each. The P-51s demonstrated not only technical superiority, but tactical sophistication that challenged German assumptions about American pilot training and combat doctrine. What disturbed German pilots most profoundly was the methodical nature of American tactics. Unlike the chaotic dogfights that characterized earlier air battles, P-51 formations maintained disciplined attacks that maximized their advantages while minimizing German opportunities for counterattack. They used superior speed to control engagement distances, superior climb rate to maintain altitude advantage, and coordinated attacks that prevented German pilots from using UVAs. The psychological pressure their traditional defensive man intensified as more German pilots encountered P-51s throughout March 1944. Each engagement reinforced the same terrifying reality. American fighters could appear anywhere over German territory at any time, with performance characteristics that made successful evasion increasingly difficult. The hunting zones that had protected German fighters were disappearing, replaced by contested airspace that favored American capabilities. Hauptmann Wilhelm Moritz, a decorated veteran with 89 confirmed victories across 3 theaters of war, experienced his first encounter with P-51s on March 12th during what should have been a routine bomber interception mission. Flying his familiar Messerschmitt Bf-109G6, Moritz had developed an almost supernatural ability to read aerial combat situations, predicting enemy movements and positioning his aircraft for maximum advantage. This intuitive understanding of air warfare had kept him alive through countless engagements against Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Thunderbolts. But as his formation approached a stream of B-24 Liberators north of Magdeburg, Moritz encountered something that defied his accumulated combat wisdom. The American escort fighters were not behaving according to any pattern he recognized. Instead of the predictable withdrawal that had governed Allied operations for years, these silver aircraft maintained aggressive positioning well beyond any previously established range limitations. The radio chatter from other German pilots revealed a growing sense of bewilderment that transcended individual units. Experienced squadron leaders, who had built their reputations on tactical predictability, found themselves facing an enemy that operated according to entirely different rules. The fundamental assumptions underlying German defensive strategy were crumbling in real time, as pilots across the Reich reported similar encounters with long-range American fighters. Oberfeldwebel Hans Dortenmann, flying with Jagdgeschwader 54, transmitted one of the most revealing radio messages of that period when he reported contact with enemy fighters over Leipzig. His transmission, monitored and recorded by German ground stations, captured the psychological disorientation experienced by pilots throughout the Luftwaffe. The Americans were operating in airspace that German intelligence had declared impossible for enemy fighters to reach. What made these encounters particularly demoralizing for German pilots was the clinical efficiency demonstrated by P-51 formations. Unlike earlier American fighters that relied primarily on superior numbers and firepower to achieve victory, the Mustangs displayed tactical sophistication that rivaled the best German units. Their pilots maintained formation discipline under fire, executed coordinated attacks with precision timing, and demonstrated situational awareness that suggested extensive combat training. Major Egon Meyer, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 2 and one of Germany's most successful bomber destroyers, with 102 victories, filed a detailed after-action report following his unit's encounter with P-51s on March 15th. His analysis revealed the depth of concern spreading through German fighter command as pilots struggled to adapt to fundamentally altered combat conditions. Meyer's report documented not just the technical capabilities of the new American fighters, but their psychological impact on German air crews. Pilots who had approached bomber interception missions with confidence born from years of successful operations now displayed obvious anxiety before takeoff. The predictable rhythms of air combat that had allowed experienced pilots to manage risk and maximize survival chances had been replaced by uncertainty and confusion. The P-51's impact extended beyond individual combat encounters to affect German strategic planning at the highest levels. Luftwaffe commanders found themselves forced to abandon offensive operations that had been planned months in advance, redirecting fighter units to defend against American formations that could now strike targets previously considered beyond enemy reach. The mathematical calculations that governed German air defense strategy required complete revision. General Major Adolf Galland's emergency conference with Reich Marshal Hermann Göring on March 20, 1944, addressed the crisis directly. German fighter losses had increased dramatically since the first P-51 encounters, not just from direct combat casualties, but from the psychological strain of facing an enemy that appeared to possess unlimited operational reach. Veteran pilots were requesting transfers to ground units, while new pilots demonstrated reluctance to engage American formations. The most disturbing aspect of P-51 operations from a German perspective was their apparent effortlessness. American fighters maintained station, with bomber formations throughout missions lasting 8 hours or more, demonstrating fuel management and operational endurance that exceeded German capabilities by substantial margins. This suggested not just superior aircraft design, but systematic advantages in logistics, maintenance, and pilot training that German forces could not match. Lieutenant Georg Schentke, shot down by P-51s near Hanover on March 22nd and subsequently interrogated by Allied intelligence officers, provided insights into German pilot morale that revealed the psychological transformation occurring throughout the Luftwaffe. His statements, preserved in captured documents, demonstrated how individual pilots were processing the reality of American technological superiority. Schentke described the moment when he realized his Messerschmitt could not outrun, outclimb, or outturn the American fighter pursuing him. This recognition represented more than tactical defeat in a single engagement. It symbolized the collapse of assumptions about German technological leadership that had sustained pilot morale throughout years of increasingly difficult combat conditions. The systematic nature of American operations particularly disturbed German observers. P-51 formations demonstrated coordination between multiple fighter groups, bomber commands, and ground control stations that suggested unprecedented organizational capabilities. German pilots reported American fighters appearing with perfect timing to counter defensive maneuvers, indicating communication and coordination systems that exceeded anything in German service. Major Heinz Baer, commanding Jagdgeschwader 1, experienced this coordination firsthand during a mission on March 25th, when his formation attempted to attack B-17s over Brunswick. American fighters appeared to anticipate his unit's approach routes, positioning themselves to intercept German attacks before they could develop into effective bomber assaults. The precision of American tactical responses suggested intelligence capabilities that German commanders found deeply unsettling. The psychological pressure intensified as German pilots began encountering the same American pilots repeatedly over multiple missions. Unlike the rotation systems that moved German pilots between different combat zones, P-51 formations appeared to maintain consistent personnel assignments that allowed individual American pilots to develop familiarity with German tactics and countermeasures. This continuity gave American formations advantages that compounded over successive encounters. Hauptmann Johannes Steinhoff, leading elements of Jagdgeschwader 77, reported engaging what appeared to be the same P-51 formation on 3 consecutive missions over a 10-day period in late March. His combat reports documented how American pilots adapted their tactics in response to German defensive measures, suggesting not just individual skill, but systematic analysis and improvement that German units struggled to match given their increasingly desperate operational circumstances. The fuel crisis affecting German operations became particularly acute as P-51s forced fighter units to engage in extended combat that consumed precious aviation gasoline at unsustainable rates. German pilots found themselves rationing fuel for training flights, while American formations demonstrated unlimited operational endurance that mocked German resource limitations. By the end of March 1944, the psychological transformation of German fighter pilots was complete. Men who had entered combat confident in their aircraft, their training, and their tactical superiority now faced each mission with the knowledge that American fighters could appear anywhere, at any time, with capabilities that exceeded German performance in virtually every measurable category. The final psychological blow came not from individual combat defeats, but from the gradual realization that the P-51's arrival represented systematic American advantages that extended far beyond aircraft design. The manufacturing capacity required to produce thousands of advanced fighters, the training infrastructure necessary to prepare pilots for long-range operations, and the logistical systems needed to maintain complex aircraft across global distances demonstrated American capabilities that German industry could never match. This recognition marked the true end of German air superiority over the Reich itself, not through dramatic battles or decisive engagements, but through the grinding psychological pressure of facing an enemy whose resources appeared unlimited while German capabilities diminished with each passing day. The true horror for German pilots emerged not from the P-51's technical superiority alone, but from what its presence revealed about the fundamental imbalance between American and German war production. Oberst Walter Ursau, commanding Jagdgeschwader 1 and holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, understood immediately that he was witnessing the arrival of mass-produced excellence. Each P-51 represented manufacturing precision that German factories could achieve only in limited quantities under laboratory conditions. Ursau's detailed analysis, filed with Luftwaffe High Command on April 2, 1944, documented observations that would prove prophetic. American fighters displayed consistent build quality across entire formations, suggesting production standards that German industry had abandoned by 1943. Paint schemes remained uniform, engine performance appeared identical between aircraft, and mechanical reliability exceeded anything German pilots had observed in Allied equipment. What devastated German morale most profoundly was recognizing that these superior aircraft were being produced in quantities that dwarfed German manufacturing capacity. Intelligence reports indicated that North American aviation was delivering completed P-51s at rates exceeding total German fighter production across all manufacturers. The mathematical implications were inescapable and terrifying. Hauptmann Anton Haeckel, flying with Jagdgeschwader 77, encountered this reality during a mission over Schweinfurt on April 8th, when his formation engaged what appeared to be an endless stream of P-51s. His radio transmission, preserved in Luftwaffe archives, captured the psychological impact of facing seemingly unlimited enemy resources. German pilots counted individual aircraft, tracking losses and replacements with desperate precision. American formations appeared to regenerate overnight. The systematic nature of American pilot training became apparent through repeated encounters with P-51 formations throughout April 1944. German pilots observed consistent tactical execution across different American units, suggesting standardized training programs that produce predictable competency levels. Unlike German pilot training, which had been reduced to minimum flight hours due to fuel shortages, American pilots demonstrated uniform skill development that indicated unlimited training resources. Lieutenant Günther Schack, interrogated after being shot down near Berlin on April 12th, provided Allied intelligence with insights into German pilot psychology that revealed the depth of demoralization spreading throughout fighter units. His statements described a force increasingly convinced that individual skill and courage could no longer compensate for systematic material disadvantages. The P-51's operational flexibility particularly unnerved German commanders who had built defensive strategies around predictable Allied limitations. American fighters demonstrated ability to escort bombers to any target in Germany while maintaining sufficient fuel reserves for extended combat. This capability eliminated the geographic sanctuaries that had allowed German industry to continue production despite Allied bombing campaigns. Major Georg Peter Eder, leading Jagdgeschwader 26, experienced this strategic shift during missions targeting American formations attacking synthetic oil facilities in central Germany. His unit discovered that P-51s could maintain combat effectiveness throughout missions lasting over 8 hours, demonstrating endurance capabilities that exceeded German fighter operations by substantial margins. The psychological pressure intensified as German pilots realized that American manufacturing was producing not just more aircraft, but better aircraft at unprecedented rates. Each P-51 encountered in combat represented technological advancement that German engineers could achieve only through lengthy development programs. American industry appeared capable of continuous improvement while maintaining mass production schedules. Oberst Johannes Trautloft, inspector of day fighters for the Luftwaffe, filed classified reports throughout April 1944, documenting the systematic collapse of German pilot confidence. Veterans with hundreds of combat missions requested transfers to ground units rather than continue facing P-51 formations. New pilots demonstrated increasing reluctance to engage American fighters, preferring to attack bomber formations only when escort coverage appeared minimal. The fuel crisis affecting German operations became catastrophic, as P-51s forced extended combat engagements that consumed aviation gasoline at unsustainable rates. German pilots found themselves limiting training flights to preserve fuel for combat missions, while American formations operated with apparent disregard for consumption limitations. This disparity in operational tempo accelerated the decline in German pilot proficiency. Hauptmann Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, Germany's most successful night fighter pilot with 121 victories, transitioned to day fighting in April 1944 and immediately encountered the change dynamics of air combat over the Reich. His experience flying against P-51s provided unique perspective on how American capabilities had evolved since the early war period. Schnaufer's combat reports documented systematic American tactical improvements that suggested continuous analysis and refinement of combat techniques. P-51 formations demonstrated coordination between fighter groups that enabled mutual support across hundreds of miles of German airspace. This level of tactical integration required communication systems and command structures that exceeded German capabilities. The most disturbing aspect of P-51 operations from German perspective was their apparent sustainability. American fighters maintained consistent operational tempo throughout spring 1944, despite increasing German defensive efforts. Luftwaffe intelligence calculated that American losses should have reduced P-51 availability significantly. Yet formations continued appearing over German targets with undiminished strength. Major Walter Nowotny, commanding Commando Nowotny and Germany's first jet fighter unit, understood that his revolutionary Me-262 jets represented Germany's last hope for regaining air superiority. Yet even these advanced aircraft faced limitations that P-51s had apparently overcome through superior logistics and support systems. The psychological transformation of German fighter pilots accelerated through May 1944, as P-51 encounters became routine rather than exceptional. Pilots who had dominated European skies for years found themselves consistently outperformed by American fighters that demonstrated technical and tactical superiority in virtually every engagement category. Oberleutnant Franz Stiegler, veteran of combat across multiple theatres, described the moment when he realised that German fighter aviation had entered irreversible decline. His encounter with P-51s over Munich on May 15th demonstrated American capabilities that exceeded not just current German performance, but projected German development programs. The systematic nature of American air operations particularly demoralized German pilots, who understood industrial warfare principles. P-51 formations operated according to predetermined schedules that maintained consistent pressure on German targets regardless of weather conditions, pilot availability, or tactical circumstances. This operational reliability suggested resource abundance that German forces could never achieve. Hauptmann Erich Hartmann, the world's most successful fighter pilot with 352 confirmed victories, encountered P-51s during his brief service on the Western Front in May 1944. His experience provided unique perspective on how American fighters compared to Soviet aircraft that had dominated his Eastern Front career. Hartmann's analysis revealed that P-51s combined the technical sophistication of German fighters with the rugged reliability of Soviet aircraft, creating capabilities that exceeded both German and Soviet designs. This synthesis of engineering approaches suggested American industrial methods that integrated best practices from multiple sources while avoiding their respective limitations. The fuel quality crisis affecting German aircraft became particularly evident when compared to P-51 performance characteristics. American fighters maintained consistent engine output throughout extended missions, while German aircraft suffered power degradation from synthetic fuels that damaged engine components. This disparity in fuel quality represented industrial capabilities that German petroleum industry could not match. Major Adolf Galland's final assessment of P-51 capabilities, delivered to Reich Marshal Göring in late May 1944, acknowledged that German fighter aviation faced systematic disadvantages that could not be overcome through tactical innovations or pilot training improvements. The mathematical realities of American production superiority had rendered German defensive strategies obsolete. The psychological impact on individual German pilots varied according to experience levels and personality factors, but common themes emerged across all units. Veterans demonstrated increasing caution that reduced their effectiveness in combat, while new pilots showed reluctance to engage American formations that often proved tactically fatal. Lieutenant Klaus Neumann, shot down by P-51s near Frankfurt on May 28th, provided captured documents that revealed the personal psychological toll of facing systematically superior opposition. His diary entries described nightmares featuring endless formations of silver American fighters that appeared immune to German defensive measures. The cumulative effect of these individual psychological breakdowns was organizational collapse that extended throughout German fighter command structure. Squadron leaders struggled to maintain unit morale while facing missions that offered minimal chances for success. Group commanders found themselves managing pilot shortages that reflected not just combat casualties, but voluntary transfers to avoid P-51 encounters. By June 1944, the psychological transformation of German fighter pilots was complete and irreversible. The arrival of P-51 Mustangs had demonstrated American capabilities that exceeded German projections by substantial margins, revealing systematic advantages that could not be countered through tactical adaptation or technological development. The men who had once ruled European skies now faced each mission with the knowledge that American fighters possessed unlimited operational reach, superior performance characteristics, and manufacturing support that dwarfed German capabilities. This recognition marked not just military defeat, but psychological surrender to the inevitability of American air supremacy. German pilots had learned to fear the distinctive silhouette of approaching P-51s. Understanding that engagement meant facing aircraft that could outperform German fighters in speed, climb, maneuverability, and endurance. More importantly, they recognized that each never match, making American victory not just probable. P-51 represented industrial capacity that German could, but mathematically certain. The psychological war was over, and German fighter pilots knew they had lost completely. The transformation from psychological defeat to operational paralysis occurred with shocking rapidity throughout June 1944. Hauptmann Josef Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader, 26 and veteran of over 400 combat missions, witnessed this collapse firsthand as his experienced pilots began displaying symptoms that German flight surgeons had never encountered before. Men who had flown through the Battle of Britain without flinching now suffered anxiety attacks during pre-flight briefings when P-51 Escorts were reported with incoming bomber formations. The medical reports filed by Luftwaffe doctors revealed disturbing patterns emerging across fighter units throughout the Reich. Pilots complained of recurring nightmares featuring silver American fighters that pursued them through endless skies, always faster, always climbing higher, always appearing when fuel ran lowest. Some experienced physical symptoms, including trembling hands, rapid heartbeat, and cold sweats when assigned missions to intercept formations with suspected P-51 coverage. Dr. Heinrich Rathenau, Chief Medical Officer for Luftwaffe Reich, documented what he termed Mustang syndrome in classified reports that would not surface until decades after the war. His clinical observations described experienced combat veterans displaying psychological responses typically associated with new pilots facing their first combat missions. The difference was that these were men with hundreds of hours of combat experience who understood exactly what they faced when engaging P-51 formations. Oberleutnant Hermann Graf, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords and veteran of both Eastern and Western fronts, exemplified this psychological deterioration when he requested transfer to a ground unit in June 1944. His official request cited combat fatigue, but his private correspondence revealed deeper concerns about facing American fighters that possessed capabilities beyond anything in German service. Graf's letters to his wife, discovered in family archives years later, provided intimate glimpses into the mental state of Germany's elite fighter pilots during this period. He described the helpless feeling of watching P-51s position themselves for attacks while knowing that his Messerschmitt lacked the performance necessary to escape or counterattack effectively. The tactical initiative had shifted completely to American pilots who could choose when, where, and how to engage German fighters. The operational tempo demanded by continuous P-51 presence over German territory created unprecedented stress on pilots who had previously managed their combat exposure through careful mission planning. German fighter tactics had traditionally relied on selecting favorable engagement conditions while avoiding disadvantageous encounters. P-51s eliminated this tactical flexibility by maintaining persistent presence over German airspace throughout daylight hours. Major Günther Lützow, inspector of day fighters and one of Germany's most successful aces with 108 victories, filed reports throughout June 1944 documenting the systematic breakdown of German fighter effectiveness. His analyses revealed that pilot performance degraded measurably when P-51s were reported in operational areas, regardless of whether direct contact occurred. The mere possibility of encountering American long-range fighters affected German tactical decision-making. The fuel crisis intensified psychological pressure as German pilots realized their operational limitations while observing American formations that appeared to possess unlimited endurance. P-51s demonstrated ability to loiter over German territory for extended periods, waiting for optimal attack opportunities while German fighters approached with barely sufficient fuel for single engagement attempts. Hauptmann Walter Krupinski, veteran of over 500 combat missions with 197 confirmed victories, experienced this disparity during a mission over Kassel on June 18th, when his formation encountered P-51s that had apparently been orbiting the target area for over an hour. His post-mission report noted that American fighters engaged his unit with full tactical flexibility, while German aircraft operated under severe fuel constraints that limited their combat options. The systematic nature of American operations particularly disturbed German pilots, who recognized the organizational capabilities required to maintain consistent P-51 coverage across multiple target areas simultaneously. Intelligence reports indicated that American fighter groups coordinated their activities to provide overlapping coverage that eliminated gaps in escort protection. This level of operational coordination required resources and planning capabilities that exceeded German organizational capacity. Oberst Hannes Trautloft's analysis of American fighter operations, completed in late June 1944, acknowledged that P-51 deployment represented more than technological advancement. The systematic integration of long-range fighters into strategic bombing campaigns demonstrated American military planning that operated on scales beyond German comprehension. Every aspect of P-51 operations reflected resource abundance that German forces could never match. The psychological impact extended beyond individual pilots to affect entire squadron dynamics, as experienced leaders struggled to maintain unit cohesion while facing missions that offered minimal prospects for success. Squadron commanders found themselves managing not just tactical challenges, but morale problems that threatened unit effectiveness even before contact with enemy forces. Hauptmann Joachim Müncheberg, leading elements of Jagdgeschwader 77, reported increasing incidents of pilots aborting missions due to mechanical problems that investigation revealed were psychosomatic responses to P-51 presence reports. His unit's effectiveness degraded measurably as pilots sought reasons to avoid engaging American formations that consistently demonstrated superior capabilities. The training crisis deepened as experienced instructors were recalled to combat units to replace casualties, while new pilots received minimal preparation before facing P-51s in operational conditions. German pilot training had been reduced to essential minimums due to fuel shortages, creating a vicious cycle where inadequately prepared pilots face systematically superior opposition with predictably catastrophic results. Oberst Adolf Galland's emergency conference with regional commanders on June 25th addressed the accelerating deterioration of German fighter effectiveness. His briefing materials, preserved in captured documents, revealed statistical analysis showing German pilot performance declining across all measurable categories since P-51 operations began. Combat effectiveness, mission completion rates, and pilot retention all showed negative trends that threaten the viability of German air defense. The most disturbing aspect of these statistics: pilot experience levels and geographic regions. P-51 impact was their consistency across different aircraft types, appeared uniform throughout German fighter aviation, suggesting systematic advantages that could not be countered through equipment changes or tactical modifications. American superiority transcended individual engagements to affect the fundamental viability of German defensive strategy. Major Erich Rudorfer, veteran of over 1,000 combat missions with 222 confirmed victories, provided unique perspective on the psychological transformation affecting German fighter pilots. His experience across multiple theaters and aircraft types allowed him to compare P-51 capabilities with every Allied fighter encountered during his career. His classified assessment concluded that American long-range fighters represented qualitative advancement that exceeded German development programs by several years. Rudorfer's technical analysis revealed that P-51s combined performance characteristics that German designers had considered mutually exclusive: high-altitude capability, extended range, exceptional maneuverability, and rugged construction typically required engineering compromises that limited overall effectiveness. American aircraft appeared to achieve optimal performance in all categories simultaneously, suggesting manufacturing techniques that exceeded German industrial capabilities. The maintenance differential between German and American operations became apparent through June 1944, as German aircraft availability declined while P-51 formations maintained consistent strength levels. German mechanics struggled with parts shortages and substitute materials that reduced aircraft reliability, while American fighters demonstrated mechanical consistency that indicated unlimited logistical support. Obergefreiter Hans Wittgenstein, chief mechanic for Jagdgeschwader 54, documented maintenance challenges that reflected broader German industrial limitations. His unit operated aircraft assembled from components manufactured by multiple contractors using varying quality standards and substitute materials. Engine reliability suffered particularly as synthetic lubricants and low-grade fuels caused accelerated wear that reduced operational availability. The contrast with American operations was stark and demoralizing. P-51 formations maintained consistent aircraft availability that suggested unlimited access to replacement parts, high-quality fuels, and skilled maintenance personnel. German intelligence estimated that American fighters operated with reliability rates exceeding 85%, compared to German availability that rarely exceeded 60% by mid-1944. The psychological pressure intensified as German pilots recognized that American manufacturing capacity enabled continuous improvement in P-51 performance, while German aircraft deteriorated due to material shortages and quality compromises. Each encounter with American fighters revealed subtle improvements in equipment and performance that indicated ongoing development programs supported by unlimited resources. Hauptmann Kurt Bühligen, commanding officer of the 2nd Gruppe of Jagdgeschwader 2, encountered this technological evolution during missions throughout June 1944. His combat reports documented P-51 variants with improved engines, enhanced armament, and modified fuel systems that extended operational range even further. American industry appeared capable of continuous refinement while maintaining mass production schedules. The strategic implications became clear to senior German commanders, who understood that P-51 deployment represented systematic American advantages that extended throughout their military-industrial complex. The aircraft themselves were merely visible symbols of manufacturing capabilities, resource abundance, and organizational efficiency that German industry could never match under wartime conditions. Generaloberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, commanding Luftwaffe Reich, submitted classified assessments to OKW, acknowledging that German air defense faced systematic disadvantages that could not be overcome through tactical innovations or pilot training improvements. His analysis concluded that American strategic bombing campaigns had achieved sustainable effectiveness that would continue regardless of German defensive measures. The human cost of this psychological transformation extended beyond combat casualties to include experienced pilots who requested transfers, new pilots who refused training assignments, and support personnel who witnessed the daily evidence of German technological inferiority. Unit cohesion deteriorated as individual survival instincts overcame military discipline and unit loyalty. Lieutenant Siegfried Schnell, shot down by P-51s near Hanover on June 30th, provided Allied interrogators with detailed insights into German pilot morale that confirmed intelligence assessments of systematic psychological breakdown. His statements revealed a force increasingly convinced that individual courage and skill could no longer compensate for material disadvantages that affected every aspect of air operations. The month of June 1944 marked the complete psychological defeat of German fighter aviation, not through dramatic battles or decisive engagements, but through the grinding realization that American capabilities exceeded German projections by margins that made effective resistance impossible. P-51 Mustangs had demonstrated not just technical superiority, but systematic advantages that rendered German air defense strategies obsolete. German pilots entered July 1944 with the certain knowledge that American fighters possessed unlimited operational reach, superior performance characteristics, and manufacturing support that dwarfed German industrial capacity. This recognition represented more than military defeat. It constituted acknowledgement of American industrial supremacy that made the outcome of the air war mathematically predetermined. The psychological war had ended with complete German surrender to the reality of American technological and industrial dominance. Every silver silhouette climbing toward Berlin carried with it the undeniable proof that Germany's brief period of air superiority was ending forever, replaced by American dominance that would only strengthen as the war continued. The summer of 1944 witnessed something unprecedented in the annals of aerial warfare. German fighter pilots, once the undisputed masters of European skies, began developing what intelligence officers would later classify as operational neurosis, specifically triggered by the distinctive engine sound of approaching Merlin engines. The psychological conditioning was so complete that veteran pilots with hundreds of combat hours would experience involuntary physical reactions upon hearing the characteristic whine of P-51 propellers cutting through thin air at altitude. Oberst Dietrich Hrabach, commanding Jagdgeschwader 54 and holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, documented this phenomenon in classified medical reports that revealed the depth of psychological trauma spreading throughout German fighter aviation. His pilots described a Pavlovian response to specific audio frequencies that indicated approaching Mustangs, triggering stress reactions that impaired their ability to function effectively in combat situations. The sound signature of the Packard Merlin engine became a harbinger of doom that German pilots could identify from distances exceeding 10 miles. Unlike the throaty roar of German radial engines or the high-pitched whine of British Spitfires, the P-51's power plant produced a distinctive harmonic frequency that carried clearly through the thin atmosphere above 25,000 feet. This acoustic warning system provided German pilots with advance notice of approaching American fighters, but rather than offering tactical advantage, it served only to amplify their psychological distress. Dr. Friedrich Bergmann, Luftwaffe chief psychiatrist, conducted extensive interviews with pilots experiencing these symptoms and discovered patterns that defied conventional understanding of combat stress disorders. These were not inexperienced airmen suffering from typical battle fatigue, but seasoned veterans whose psychological breakdown was triggered specifically by encounters with a single enemy aircraft type. The specificity of this response suggested conditioning through repeated traumatic experiences that associated P-51 characteristics with inevitable defeat. Hauptmann Heinrich Ehrler, veteran ace with 209 confirmed victories, exemplified this psychological deterioration when he began refusing mission assignments that involved potential P-51 encounters. His service record showed flawless performance against Soviet fighters on the Eastern Front, yet his effectiveness degraded measurably when transferred to Reich defense duties. Medical examinations revealed no physical impairment, but psychological evaluation documented severe anxiety responses triggered by specific mission parameters. The institutional memory of German fighter aviation began incorporating P-51 encounters as cautionary examples that shaped tactical doctrine and pilot training programs. Flight instructors, themselves often veterans of unsuccessful engagements with American long-range fighters, inadvertently transmitted their psychological trauma to new pilots through training exercises that emphasized P-51 capabilities while undermining confidence in German aircraft performance. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, one of Germany's most respected fighter leaders, observed this psychological contagion spreading through training units, where instructors described P-51 encounters in terms that emphasized American technological superiority while minimizing German tactical options. New pilots absorbed these lessons and developed preconceived expectations of defeat that affected their performance even before their first combat missions. The tactical modifications implemented by German fighter units throughout July 1944 reflected this psychological transformation from aggressive offensive operations to defensive survival strategies. Squadron leaders abandoned traditional attack formations designed to maximize firepower against bomber formations, instead adopting evasive maneuvers intended primarily to avoid P-51 interception. This tactical retreat represented acknowledgement that German fighters could no longer compete effectively with American escort capabilities. Major Hartmann Grasser, leading Jagdgeschwader 301, implemented new operational procedures that required his pilots to monitor radio frequencies continuously for P-51 position reports before engaging any American formation. His tactical orders, preserved in captured documents, revealed systematic modifications to German attack patterns designed around P-51 operational characteristics rather than optimal bomber interception techniques. These defensive measures proved psychologically counterproductive by reinforcing pilot perceptions of P-51 invincibility while reducing German tactical flexibility. Pilots operating under constant threat of superior enemy interception developed cautious flying habits that reduced their effectiveness even when engaging unescorted bomber formations. The psychological shadow cast by P-51 operations extended beyond direct encounters to affect all aspects of German fighter performance. The fuel crisis affecting German operations intensified psychological pressure as pilots realized their tactical options were constrained not only by superior enemy performance, but also by operational limitations that American forces appeared immune to experiencing. P-51 formations demonstrated endurance capabilities that allowed them to maintain combat effectiveness throughout extended missions, while German fighters approached each engagement with barely sufficient fuel for single attack attempts. Hauptmann Anton Dubele, flying with Jagdgeschwader 7, experienced this disparity during a mission over Leipzig on July 12, when his formation encountered P-51s that had apparently been loitering in the target area for over 2 hours. His post-mission analysis noted that American fighters engaged his unit with complete tactical freedom, while German aircraft operated under severe fuel constraints that limited their combat duration to minutes rather than hours. The systematic nature of American fighter operations became increasingly apparent as German intelligence documented P-51 activities across multiple combat zones simultaneously. American formations demonstrated coordination between fighter groups operating hundreds of miles apart, suggesting communication capabilities and command structures that exceeded German organizational capacity by substantial margins. Oberst Walter Ursau's intelligence assessment, completed in mid-July 1944, acknowledged that P-51 deployment represented integration of advanced technology with superior logistics and unlimited resources. His analysis concluded that American long-range fighters operated within support systems that German industry could never replicate, making tactical parity impossible regardless of German aircraft development programs. The psychological impact on German ground personnel paralleled the trauma experienced by aircrew, as maintenance teams struggled with equipment shortages while observing American operations that demonstrated unlimited logistical support. Aircraft mechanics reported demoralization when comparing German aircraft assembled from substitute materials with captured P-51 components that displayed manufacturing precision exceeding peacetime German industrial standards. Obergefreiter Klaus Riedel, serving with maintenance units at Rechlin Test Center, documented material quality comparisons that revealed systematic German industrial limitations. His technical reports described P-51 components manufactured to tolerances that German factories achieved only under laboratory conditions, yet American industry produced these precision parts at rates exceeding total German fighter manufacturing across all contractors. The training pipeline crisis deepened throughout July as experienced instructors were recalled to combat units, while new pilots received abbreviated preparation that emphasized survival techniques rather than aggressive combat tactics. German pilot training philosophy evolved from creating offensive fighters to producing defensive aviators whose primary mission objective was avoiding P-51 encounters while accomplishing minimum mission requirements. Oberst Günther Lützow's training directive, issued to flight schools throughout the Reich, reflected this psychological transformation by emphasizing evasive maneuvers and situational awareness designed to minimize P-51 contact rather than traditional gunnery and formation flying skills intended for offensive operations. The curriculum changes acknowledged that German pilots could no longer expect to engage American fighters on equal terms. The medical crisis reached critical proportions as flight surgeons documented increasing numbers of pilots requesting medical exemptions from missions involving suspected P-51 coverage. These requests cited various physical ailments that investigation revealed were psychosomatic responses to combat stress, specifically associated with facing systematically superior opposition. Traditional military discipline proved inadequate for addressing psychological breakdown that affected experienced veterans across multiple units simultaneously. Dr. Hans-Georg Asmus, regional flight surgeon for Luftwaffe Reich, submitted classified reports documenting psychiatric casualties that exceeded physical combat losses in several fighter units. His statistical analysis revealed correlation between P-51 encounter frequency and pilot psychological breakdown rates that suggested systematic causation rather than random combat stress responses. The operational implications became clear as German fighter effectiveness declined measurably across all performance categories, including mission completion rates, target engagement success, and pilot retention statistics. Units equipped with identical aircraft and operating under similar conditions showed dramatically different effectiveness depending on their exposure to P-51 operations, with heavily engaged units demonstrating systematic performance degradation. Major Georg Peter Eder's statistical analysis, compiled for Jagdgeschwader 26, documented measurable decline in pilot performance that correlated directly with P-51 encounter frequency. His data revealed that individual pilot effectiveness decreased progressively with each successive engagement with American long-range fighters, suggesting cumulative psychological damage that traditional rest and recuperation could not address. The strategic implications extended beyond individual unit effectiveness to affect German air defense planning, as senior commanders acknowledged that P-51 capabilities had rendered traditional interception strategies obsolete. The mathematical calculations underlying German defensive deployments required complete revision to account for American fighters that could appear anywhere over German territory with sufficient fuel reserves for extended combat operations. General Major Adolf Galland's emergency conference with regional commanders on July 28 addressed the systematic collapse of German air defense effectiveness. His briefing materials documented statistical evidence showing German fighter performance declining across every measurable category since P-51 operations began, with no indication that tactical modifications or equipment improvements could reverse these negative trends. The human cost of this psychological warfare extended beyond combat statistics to encompass the complete transformation of German fighter aviation from an elite offensive force to a defensive organization focused primarily on survival rather than tactical success. Veterans who had dominated European skies for years found themselves psychologically defeated by an enemy aircraft that represented not just superior technology, but systematic advantages that German industry could never match. Oberst Hannes Trautloft's final assessment, submitted to Luftwaffe High Command in late July, acknowledged that German fighter aviation had entered irreversible decline, accelerated by psychological factors that transcended purely military considerations. His analysis concluded that P-51 operations had achieved strategic objectives through systematic destruction of German pilot morale rather than traditional attrition warfare. The psychological transformation was complete and irreversible. German fighter pilots had been conditioned through repeated traumatic experiences to associate P-51 encounters with inevitable defeat, creating systematic degradation of performance that affected all aspects of air operations. The silver silhouettes climbing toward German targets carried with them not just superior firepower and performance, but the psychological certainty of American technological dominance that made German resistance mathematically futile. August 1944 marked the final phase of psychological collapse as German fighter pilots began experiencing what military psychiatrists would later classify as anticipatory defeat syndrome, a condition characterized by performance degradation that occurred before enemy contact. The mere intelligence report of P-51 formations approaching German airspace triggered stress responses that impaired pilot effectiveness even when direct engagement never materialized. The institutional knowledge accumulated by German fighter aviation over 5 years of combat operations had been systematically invalidated by American technological advancement that rendered traditional tactics obsolete. Everything German pilots had learned about air combat timing, positioning, energy management, and tactical coordination proved inadequate when facing P-51 formations that operated according to entirely different performance parameters. The psychological war had ended with complete German capitulation to American industrial and technological supremacy. The men who had once ruled European skies now approached each mission with the certain knowledge that silver American fighters possessed unlimited operational reach, superior performance characteristics, and manufacturing support that dwarfed German capabilities by margins that made effective resistance impossible. The autumn of 1944 brought a new dimension of psychological warfare that German pilots had never experienced before. The P-51's impact transcended individual combat encounters to create what Luftwaffe medical officers termed systemic operational paralysis, a condition where entire fighter units became functionally ineffective despite possessing adequate aircraft and personnel. This phenomenon manifested most dramatically in the behavior of veteran squadron leaders, who had previously demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment under extreme combat conditions. Hauptmann Wolfgang Sparta, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 400 and veteran of over 300 combat missions, exemplified this transformation when he began implementing operational procedures that prioritized unit preservation over mission accomplishment. His tactical orders, captured in Allied intelligence sweeps, revealed systematic modifications to German attack doctrine designed primarily to minimize P-51 contact rather than maximize bomber interception effectiveness. Sparta's transformation reflected broader changes occurring throughout German fighter command, as experienced leaders struggled to balance military objectives with realistic assessments of American capabilities. The psychological burden of sending pilots into combat against systematically superior opposition created ethical dilemmas that traditional military training had never addressed. Squadron commanders found themselves managing not just tactical challenges, but moral responsibility for missions that offered minimal prospects for success. The radio communications between German fighter units during this period revealed the depth of psychological transformation occurring throughout the force. Veteran pilots who had previously maintained strict radio discipline began transmitting emotional responses that indicated complete abandonment of professional detachment. Flight leaders reported American fighter contacts using language that emphasized their own tactical helplessness, rather than providing useful tactical information to other German units. Oberst Herbert Ehlefeld, inspector of day fighters and veteran of campaigns across multiple theaters, documented these communication breakdowns in classified reports that would remain buried in German archives for decades. His analysis revealed that P-51 encounters had destroyed the psychological foundation of German tactical coordination by undermining pilot confidence in their ability to execute complex maneuvers under enemy pressure. The training crisis reached catastrophic proportions as German flight schools struggled to prepare new pilots for combat conditions that exceeded anything in their institutional experience. Traditional training programs had been designed around tactical scenarios where German aircraft possessed performance advantages or at least competitive capabilities. P-51 operations invalidated these assumptions and left instructors without relevant experience to share with new pilots. Major Heinrich Hackler, commanding the Advanced Fighter Training School at Lechfeld, submitted requests for curriculum modifications that reflected the changed realities of air combat over the Reich. His proposals emphasized survival techniques and evasive maneuvers while de-emphasizing traditional gunnery and formation fighting skills that had become irrelevant when facing American long-range fighters with superior performance characteristics. The psychological conditioning of new German pilots began before their first combat missions, as instructors inadvertently transmitted their own trauma through training exercises that emphasized P-51 capabilities while undermining confidence in German tactical doctrine. Student pilots absorbed these lessons and developed preconceived expectations of defeat that affected their performance during subsequent operational assignments. Lieutenant Franz Stiegler, completing advanced training at Erding in September 1944, described the atmosphere of resigned futility that pervaded German pilot preparation programs. His diary entries, discovered years later, revealed systematic demoralization among student pilots who understood they were being prepared for missions against an enemy that possessed overwhelming technological advantages. The fuel crisis intensified psychological pressure as German pilots realized their operational limitations while observing American formations that demonstrated unlimited endurance capabilities. P-51s maintained station over German targets for hours at a time, creating persistent threat conditions that forced German fighters to operate under extreme time constraints that eliminated tactical flexibility. Hauptmann Gerhard Barkhorn, Germany's second highest scoring ace, with 301 confirmed victories, experienced this disparity during his brief assignment to Western Front operations in September 1944. His combat reports documented P-51 formations that appeared to possess unlimited loiter time over German territory, allowing American pilots to select optimal engagement conditions, while German fighters approached with barely sufficient fuel for single combat attempts. The maintenance differential between German and American operations became increasingly apparent as German aircraft availability declined, while P-51 formations maintained consistent operational strength. German mechanics struggled with parts shortages and substitute materials that reduced aircraft reliability, while American fighters demonstrated mechanical consistency that indicated unlimited logistical support systems. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Heerget, chief mechanic for Jagdgeschwader 11, documented maintenance challenges that reflected broader German industrial collapse. His technical reports described aircraft assembled from components manufactured by multiple contractors using varying quality standards and substitute materials that compromised performance and reliability. Engine problems became epidemic as synthetic lubricants and low-grade fuels caused accelerated wear patterns. The contrast with American operations proved psychologically devastating for German ground personnel, who witnessed daily evidence of superior American manufacturing capabilities. Captured P-51 components displayed precision manufacturing that exceeded German peacetime industrial standards. Yet American factories produced these components while maintaining mass production schedules that dwarfed total German output across all manufacturers. The tactical evolution of German fighter operations reflected complete abandonment of offensive doctrine in favor of survival strategies that emphasized threat avoidance rather than mission accomplishment. Squadron leaders developed new operational procedures that required continuous monitoring of American fighter positions before attempting any engagement with bomber formations. Major Kurt Bühligen, commanding the 2nd Gruppe of Jagdgeschwader II, implemented tactical modifications that transformed his unit from an aggressive interceptor force into a defensive organization focused primarily on avoiding P-51 contact. His operational orders revealed systematic changes to German attack patterns designed around American fighter capabilities rather than optimal bomber interception techniques. These defensive measures proved counterproductive by reinforcing pilot perceptions of American invincibility while reducing German tactical effectiveness even when engaging unescorted bomber formations. The psychological shadow cast by P-51 operations affected all aspects of German fighter performance, creating systematic degradation that extended beyond direct combat encounters. The intelligence assessments compiled by German reconnaissance units throughout autumn 1944 revealed American fighter deployment patterns that suggested unlimited operational resources supporting P-51 formations across multiple combat zones simultaneously. German intelligence calculated that American losses should have reduced P-51 availability significantly, yet formations continued appearing over German targets with undiminished strength levels. Oberst Wolfgang Schellmann's analysis, completed for Luftwaffe High Command in October 1944, documented American fighter operations that exceeded German projections by substantial margins. His statistical assessment concluded that P-51 deployment represented manufacturing capabilities and logistical systems that German industry could never replicate under any circumstances, making tactical parity impossible regardless of German technological development programs. The psychological impact on German civilian populations became apparent as air raid sirens increasingly signaled the approach of American formations that German fighters could not effectively intercept. The visible failure of Luftwaffe units to prevent Allied bombing attacks undermined public confidence in German military capabilities, while reinforcing perceptions of American technological supremacy. Dr. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry struggled to address civilian morale problems caused by obvious German air defense failures that contradicted official claims of military effectiveness. Internal ministry reports documented growing public awareness that German fighters could not prevent American bombing operations, creating credibility problems for government information programs that had emphasized German technological leadership. The medical crisis reached unprecedented levels as Luftwaffe hospitals treated increasing numbers of pilots suffering from combat stress disorders, specifically associated with P-51 encounters. Traditional treatment methods proved inadequate for addressing psychological trauma caused by systematic technological inferiority rather than conventional battle fatigue or combat exhaustion. Dr. Wilhelm Beigelberg, consulting psychiatrist for Luftwaffe Reich, documented psychiatric casualties that exceeded physical combat losses in several fighter units during October 1944. His clinical studies revealed that pilots experiencing repeated P-51 encounters developed chronic anxiety disorders that persisted even during periods away from combat operations. The training pipeline completely collapsed as experienced instructors were killed in combat faster than replacement personnel could be prepared. New pilots received minimal preparation before assignment to operational units, where they faced American fighters with performance characteristics that exceeded anything covered in abbreviated training programs. Oberst Günther Lützow's final training directive, issued in November 1944, acknowledged that German pilot preparation could no longer provide adequate preparation for combat conditions that students would encounter during operational assignments. His curriculum modifications emphasized basic survival techniques, while abandoning advanced tactical training that had become irrelevant when facing systematically superior opposition. The strategic implications became inescapable as senior German commanders acknowledged that P-51 operations had achieved decisive strategic effects through systematic destruction of Luftwaffe effectiveness. American bombers could now strike any target in Germany with fighter escort protection throughout their missions, making German air defense strategy obsolete. General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf's assessment, submitted to OKW in late November 1944, concluded that German air defense had become functionally ineffective due to psychological factors that transcended purely military considerations. His analysis documented systematic degradation of pilot performance that could not be reversed through tactical modifications, equipment improvements, or personnel changes. The human cost extended beyond combat statistics to encompass the complete transformation of German fighter aviation from an elite offensive force into a demoralized defensive organization that could no longer accomplish its primary mission of protecting German airspace. Veterans who had dominated European skies found themselves psychologically defeated by systematic American advantages that rendered individual skill and courage irrelevant. The final psychological blow came with the realization that P-51 operations represented only the beginning of American technological advancement rather than peak capability. Intelligence reports indicated continuous improvements in American fighter performance, while German aircraft development stagnated due to resource limitations and industrial collapse. By December 1944, the psychological defeat of German fighter aviation was complete and irreversible. P-51 Mustangs had achieved more than tactical superiority. They had demonstrated American industrial and technological capabilities that made German resistance mathematically futile. The silver fighters climbing toward Berlin carried with them the undeniable proof that American dominance would only strengthen as the war continued, making German defeat not just probable, but absolutely certain. The men who had once laughed at early American fighters now lived in constant fear of the distinctive sound that announced approaching P-51 formations. Their psychological transformation from confident masters of European skies to demoralized survivors marked the end of German air power and the beginning of American aerial supremacy that would reshape the entire character of modern warfare. The winter of 1944 to 1945 witnessed the final psychological disintegration of what had once been the world's most formidable fighter force. German pilots who had survived the autumn campaigns now faced a reality that transcended military defeat to encompass complete spiritual collapse. The distinctive whistle of Merlin engines at altitude had become a death knell that triggered involuntary physical responses in men who had previously faced combat with unwavering courage. Hauptmann Rudolf Sinner, commanding the remnants of Jagdgeschwader 54, documented phenomena that defied conventional understanding of combat psychology. His pilots exhibited symptoms that flight surgeons had never encountered in previous campaigns. Veterans with over 200 combat missions experienced panic attacks during pre-flight briefings when intelligence reports mentioned P-51 escort activity. These were not green recruits suffering from battle nerves, but seasoned professionals whose psychological foundation had been systematically destroyed. The sound alone became sufficient to trigger complete breakdown. Obergefreiter Hans Wolf, a veteran ground crewman at Salzwedel Airfield, reported incidents where experienced pilots abandoned aircraft during engine warm-up procedures upon hearing the distinctive harmonic frequency of approaching Packard Merlins. The acoustic signature that had once provided tactical warning now served only to amplify psychological terror that had consumed the entire force. Dr. Ernst Rodenwalt, chief psychiatrist for the Luftwaffe Medical Service, conducted extensive interviews with affected personnel and discovered patterns that challenged every assumption about combat stress disorders. These pilots described recurring nightmares featuring endless formations of silver fighters that pursued them through boundless skies, always faster, always climbing higher, always appearing when ammunition ran lowest and fuel gauges approached empty. The institutional memory of German fighter aviation had been corrupted by systematic trauma that infected training programs, tactical doctrine, and operational planning. Flight instructors unconsciously transmitted their psychological damage to new pilots through exercises that emphasized American technological superiority while undermining confidence in German capabilities. Students absorbed these lessons before their first combat missions, developing preconceived expectations of defeat that became self-fulfilling prophecies. Major Erich Rudorfer, veteran of over 1,000 combat sorties, exemplified this transformation when he began refusing mission assignments that involved potential P-51 encounters. His service record showed flawless performance against Soviet fighters throughout 3 years of Eastern Front operations. Yet his effectiveness evaporated completely when transferred to Reich defense duties. Medical examinations revealed no physical impairment, but psychological evaluation documented severe anxiety responses triggered by specific acoustic frequencies. The tactical modifications implemented throughout German fighter units reflected complete abandonment of offensive doctrine in favor of survival strategies that prioritized threat avoidance over mission accomplishment. Squadron leaders developed elaborate procedures for monitoring American fighter positions before attempting engagement with any bomber formation, transforming aggressive interceptor units into cautious defensive organizations focused primarily on avoiding contact with superior opposition. Oberst Dietrich Hrabach's operational orders, captured during Allied advances in early 1945, revealed systematic changes to German attack patterns designed around P-51 operational characteristics rather than optimal bomber interception techniques. His units operated under standing instructions to disengage immediately upon sighting American escort fighters, regardless of tactical circumstances or mission requirements. These defensive measures proved psychologically counterproductive by reinforcing pilot perceptions of American invincibility while reducing German tactical effectiveness even when engaging unescorted formations. The psychological shadow cast by P-51 operations extended far beyond direct combat encounters to affect every aspect of German fighter performance, creating systematic degradation that persisted even during missions where American long-range fighters never appeared. The fuel crisis reached catastrophic proportions as German pilots realized their operational limitations while observing American formations that demonstrated unlimited endurance capabilities. P-51S maintained persistent coverage over German territory throughout daylight hours, creating threat conditions that forced German fighters to operate under extreme time constraints that eliminated all tactical flexibility. Hauptmann Walter Krupinski experienced this disparity during his final Western Front mission in January 1945, when his formation encountered P-51s that had apparently been loitering over the target area for over 3 hours. His post-mission report noted that American fighters engaged his unit with complete tactical freedom while German aircraft approached with barely sufficient fuel for single engagement attempts lasting minutes rather than hours. The psychological transformation was complete and irreversible. By early 1945, the men who had once ruled European skies approached each mission with the certain knowledge that American P-51 Mustangs possessed unlimited operational reach, superior performance characteristics, and manufacturing support that dwarfed German capabilities by margins that made effective resistance mathematically impossible. The distinctive sound of Merlin engines had become a harbinger of inevitable defeat, conditioning an entire generation of German fighter pilots to associate American long-range Escorts with systematic technological superiority that individual courage could never overcome. The silver silhouettes climbing toward Berlin carried with them the undeniable proof that the age of German air dominance was ending forever.